Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Afghanistan, where 34 people, most of them women and children, have been killed after a bus hit a roadside bomb in western Afghanistan. The Herat governor's office says 17 others were injured in the explosion on the Herat-Kandahar highway. This comes a day after the UN expressed grave concern over the deaths of nearly 1,400 civilians this year. Moving on to Seoul, which claims North Korea has conducted 2 more short-range ballistic missile tests off its east coast. The second missile launches in a week comes ahead of joint military drills by South Korean and US forces. South Korean Defense Minister Jong Kong-do said the missiles were launched from near the port of Wonsan. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the launches didn't pose any immediate threat to the national security. Cabinet Secretary General Yoshide Suga said Tokyo will continue to seek a summit with North Korea despite the tests. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has expressed optimism about the resumption of denuclearization talks with Pyongyang. High-level trade talks between the U.S. and China have started in Shanghai. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin represent the Trump administration. China's Vice Premier Liu He is Beijing's top negotiator at the talks. These are the first face-to-face negotiations since trade talks broke down in May. Liu met and shook hands with Lighthizer and Mnuchin in front of the media ahead of the day's negotiations. But the officials made no public remarks. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Beijing not to drag out the negotiations. He said there would be either no deal or a tougher one if he wins re-election in November next year. China has pledged to contribute $1 million to Palestine's Gaza Strip food program. This comes amid acute financial crisis in the country after the U.S. cut more than half of its aid. The deal was signed in the West Bank city of Ramallah. The United Nations is running more than 700 schools and a network of 150 healthcare clinics in the region. In Sudan, protest leaders have cancelled political negotiations with the ruling military council after 5 school children were killed during demonstrations. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has disbursed $250 million in financial assistance to Sudan to ease pressure on its economy. The details in this report.
Hundreds protested in Khartoum in response to opposition calls for nationwide demonstrations. Sudan's military rulers have condemned the killing of school children in the central town of Al Obeid on Tuesday.
The events escalated quickly. Some infiltrators intervened and created a state of chaos, which resulted in the looting of property owned by the Khartoum Bank in El Obeid and an attempt to loot the French bank in El Obeid as well. This led to the fall of a number of martyrs, reaching 5 people up till now.
United Nations has called for an investigation into what protesters said was a massacre. Protest leaders demanded that the ruling military council immediately agree to a final power transition deal. Earlier, the opposition rejected the findings of an investigation into a deadly June raid on a Khartoum sit-in. Protest leaders say the report exonerated the military council from the killings.
The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been warned of civil unrest in Wales in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford and local farmers say the situation would be catastrophic for the country. Johnson made his first official visit to Wales to seek farmers' support for the Brexit plans. But Drakeford said the UK is more at risk now than at any time in his political lifetime. Johnson argued the next move in Brexit talks is up to the European Union.
We cannot go on with the withdrawal agreement as it currently is, and everybody understands that it's dead. We need to get that message across to our friends. If they understand that, then I think we're going to be at the races. If they can't compromise, if they really can't do it, then clearly we have to get ready for a no-deal exit.
Johnson will visit Northern Ireland later today. Now moving on to the US, which has formally asked Germany to join France and Britain in a mission to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. The US says it has sought Berlin's assistance in combating Iranian aggression. The request comes after Britain sent 2 ships to escort UK-flagged vessels in the Strait of Hormuz last week. A US embassy spokesman has confirmed the move. Tensions between Iran and the US spiked after President Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal last year and reimposed sanctions on Tehran. Since then, a series of attacks on oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz has heightened the tensions. Russia has refused to attend international talks on Venezuela's political crisis in Peru next month. The foreign ministry said it declined the invitation because the Venezuelan government representatives have not been invited. Peru has invited the US, China, and dozens of other countries to discuss the situation in Venezuela on August the 6th. A political crisis has gripped Venezuela since January, when opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself the country's interim president. Washington and its allies recognize Guaido as the new president of Venezuela, but Russia and China support Nicolas Maduro. The United States has denied Russia's accusations that Washington is planning to quit the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. U.S. Ambassador Robert Woods has called the accusations crafty and Soviet-like propaganda. Ambassador Woods says Russia has a well-established pattern of violating treaties. The United States has signed but not ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
I have to respond to the sort of crafty Soviet-like propaganda that was espoused earlier during the session by our Russian colleague. We have to remember, this is Russia we're talking about. This is a country that has flouted its Budapest memoranda commitments. It's violated the INF Treaty. The U.S. engaged in over 35 meetings with Russians at different levels to try to resolve this issue. We could not.
A Ukrainian court has approved the seizure of a detained Russian oil tanker. Ukrainian authorities captured the Russian tanker at the Danube River port of Izmail last week. Ukraine later released the 10 crew members but did not allow them to return to Russia. The Russian tanker was detained for its alleged involvement in the seizure of 3 Ukrainian vessels in November last year. In May, an international maritime tribunal ordered Russia to release 24 Ukrainian sailors and their ships. The International Court also urged both the countries to refrain from taking any provocative action. The United Nations has said Russian police appear to have used excessive force against protesters this weekend. Police rounded up over 1,000 demonstrators in Moscow in one of the biggest crackdowns in recent years. Details in this report.
A UN spokesman says Russian authorities may have violated the basic rights to freedom of expression. UN human rights spokesman Rupert Colville questioned the disqualification of 57 opposition candidates from the Moscow city elections. The exclusion of opposition candidates from local polls triggered the protests. The opposition says they were barred for political reasons.
We're concerned that the Russian police appear to have used excessive force against protesters during the rally in central Moscow on Saturday. We understand excessive use of force, or alleged excessive use of force leading to physical injuries, has been alleged in the case of more than 70 individual demonstrators.
A court in Moscow rejected jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny's appeal for early release on medical grounds. He was jailed for 30 days last week for urging people to take part in an unauthorized protest. Navalny's lawyer and doctor said he may have been poisoned.
we urge the Russian authorities to allow people to organize and take part in peaceful assemblies without restrictions other than those permitted under international human rights law. And when managing crowds in Russia, as anywhere else, use of force by the police should always be proportionate to the threat, if there is one.
Meanwhile, Russian prosecutors have warned against further unauthorized rallies, saying they will face a crackdown. They also urged extra vigilance in the run-up to the local elections in September.
Said an unfortunate incident in the U.S. 2 people have been killed in Mississippi in the 4th mass shooting to hit the U.S. in 3 days. Police said the shooter opened fire at a Walmart store in South Haven, killing 2 employees. Police said the suspect was shot and taken to a local hospital with injuries. They said the suspect was believed to be a disgruntled worker with a grievance against his employer. This comes hours after a man murdered 3 members of a family at their home in a small Wisconsin town. Earlier, 4 people were shot dead and 12 others wounded at a shooting in a California festival. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus. Welcome back. Pakistan has welcomed 500 Indian Sikh pilgrims who are visiting the country. They have traveled to mark the 550th anniversary of the birth of the religion's founder, Guru Nanak. The Foreign Office said the celebrations will be held at the Guru's birthplace in Nankana Sahib on Thursday. Pakistan's High Commission in New Delhi issued special visas to the pilgrims earlier this month. Officials say the pilgrims will return to India after the ceremony. Japan has offered to mediate the peaceful repatriation of Rohingya between Bangladesh and Myanmar. Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono made the offer in a meeting with his Bangladeshi counterpart, Dr. Abdul Momin, in Dhaka. Momin said Dhaka will take a decision after internal discussions. The Japanese Foreign Minister will visit Rohingya refugee camps in the Cox's Bazar district. Kono will then leave for Yangon today to discuss with the Rohingya with Myanmar's leadership. Myanmar and Bangladesh are in stalemate over the return of Rohingya despite 2 agreements in November 2017 and January 2018. Ethnic cleansing by Myanmar's military in 2017 forced over 700,000 Rohingya Muslims to flee. In France, an environmental protection group has filed a lawsuit over the lead contamination from the Notre Dame fire. It accused authorities of failing to contain potential lead poisoning in a timely fashion. The cathedral's spire and roof, which collapsed in the April inferno, contained more than 450 tons of lead. High levels of lead were later detected in the air and nearby buildings, including primary schools. The suit alleges Paris authorities were aware the fire had dispersed large quantities of lead into the air. French authorities are now under pressure to show they took adequate steps to protect the public's health following the fire. Teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg will cross the Atlantic by boat to attend 2 climate conferences. Climate activist Thunberg will be a passenger on the Malaysia 2 yacht built to sail around the world. Earlier, she refused to fly to New York because of the environmental impact of air travel. She will later continue her journey by low-carbon transport to the annual Santiago Climate Change Conference in December. Greta's father and a filmmaker will accompany her on the voyage, which will take 2 weeks to complete. In August last year, Thunberg started a weekly school strike on Fridays, calling for greater action on climate change. In Russia, devastating floods have hit the southeastern Irkutsk region of Siberia because the water level of local rivers has risen by over a meter. Russian emergency services have arrived in the Irkutsk town of Toulon. The local administration expects the flooding to worsen in the next few days. At least 25 people have been killed, with 7 missing after floods hit the Irkutsk region. Almost 11,000 houses have been flooded and damaged. China's city of Aksu has won a 30-year-long war against erosion. Its successful ecological campaign has turned swathes of desert into a thriving forest. What in this report?
In 1986, the western Chinese city of Aksu began an ambitious tree planting project. Located on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, Aksu used to be buried in sand for most of the year. Experts fought dust storms to engineer a green miracle.
To prevent water from escaping, we lay down in a ditch like this, using our bodies to block the holes.
Citizens and specialists worked relentlessly over the decades to bring fertility to the wasteland. The 13 million acre oasis has now made agriculture a pillar of the local economy. Once a sea of sand, Aksu is now renowned in China for its apples, dates and walnuts.
A Singaporean engineering company has built a robot that can serve up a hot bowl of laksa. The noodle soup is one of the city-state's best-known dishes. More details in this report.
A piping hot bowl of soup is the perfect complement to the cold weather. A robot has been created to feed lovers of laksa, which is a local dish of rice noodles served in a curry sauce. The electric sous chef can serve a bowl of this noodle soup dish in record time of just 45 seconds. The robot, called Sophie by its creators, can blanch noodles, add pre-cooked prawns and ladle spicy coconut soup.
It's excellent. I would say there's no difference between the one created by the robot and the human.
The robot will let chefs cut down on repetitive tasks and focus on understanding customers' needs. Another local firm said it will roll out 300 robot cleaners by March next year to help clean hotels, shopping malls and government buildings.
We have to actually be very precise in every step of doing the laksa. That include having the prawn in the laksa as well. They have to actually be very precise and they have to do programming just to capture one prawn at a time. And when it comes to the gravy, they have to make sure that the gravy doesn't spill as well.
The robots can actually speak to the client, help them with the laksa and top up the ingredients and clean up the stations as well.
Russia is home to around 200,000 Roma people. The community has a tense relationship with ethnic Russians, but a Roma theater in Moscow's city center continues to hold nightly shows and attract Russians of all ethnicities. More in this report.
The Roma people migrated to Russia from Poland in the 18th century. Before the Bolshevik Revolution, they faced discrimination and were characterized as criminals. This changed somewhat when Soviet strongman Joseph Stalin launched his Friendship of the People's campaign. Things reverted to the way they were when the Soviet Union broke up in 1991.
In the Soviet Union, the Roma were romanticized and portrayed as people who spent their time singing and dancing. But in the 1990s, the media began to describe them as criminals.
The Roma theater in Moscow, launched by Stalin in the 1930s, continues to stand as a symbol by a bygone era.
This theater became a place which proclaimed that Roma were culturally equal to all the other nationalities living in the Soviet Union.
In June, a brawl broke out in the Penza region between ethnic Russians and Romanes. One ethnic Russian died of a stab wound, reinforcing the Roma people's negative image in the media. The theater in Moscow is one of the few outlets in Russia showing there is a different side to ethnic Romanis. But as time passes by, the theater's audience is growing older and few young people are showing up.
Lows and the highs of the business world. Now stock markets across Asia are in negative territory after US President Donald Trump threatened China ahead of trade talks today. Hong Kong is leading the slide with a decline of over 1%. The Nikkei and Shanghai Composite are also down about 0.5%. The Kospi and ASX 200 have also lost ground. Meanwhile, oil prices are trading higher for a fifth straight day after reports of falling US inventories. Brent futures are up nearly 1% in Asian trading. US President Donald Trump has called on the Federal Reserve to significantly cut the benchmark interest rate. His demand came before the central bank opened its two-day policy meeting. Markets overwhelmingly expect the central bank to cut the key lending rate by 25 basis points. It would be the first cut in over a decade amid a slowing global economy as a result of trade uncertainty. Expressing disappointment, President Trump said he would like to see a large cut of 50 basis points. But a cut of that size is only used when the economy is experiencing a steep slowdown. Earlier, the Federal Reserve Chairman signaled rates could be lowered due to economic uncertainties. South Korean electronics giant Samsung says its profits have plunged 56% in the second quarter of this year. It attributed most of the decline to falling memory chip prices. Samsung posted an operating profit of about $5.5 billion for the 3 months up to June. The results are in line with the company's estimates. Samsung said that the decline reflects a broader slowdown in the industry, which has been weighed down by the US-China trade war. It also faces more disruption to its chip business from growing trade row between Seoul and Tokyo. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he will encourage the two sides to end their dispute at an ASEAN meeting in Bangkok this week. At the Pan American Games in Lima, Brazil have won the gold medal after beating Argentina in the women's handball final. The Brazilians eased their way past Argentina by 30 goals to 21. The victory enabled Brazil to capture 6th consecutive gold in the continental competitions. Both the teams were tied at 12 goals by the end of the first half, but Brazil powered ahead by scoring 18 goals in the second half. Earlier, weightlifter Francisco Barreto Brazil clinched gold in 109 kilograms plus category. Cuba's Luis Loret claimed silver, while Mexico's Raul Manriquez secured the bronze. French champions Paris Saint-Germain have signed Everton midfielder Idrissa Gueye on a 4-year contract. Financial details of the deal were not disclosed, but reports suggest PSG would pay about £30 million for the player. The 29-year-old Senegal international joined Everton from Aston Villa in 2016 and made 108 appearances for the Merseyside club. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.